Hi, welcome to this video on organization design. In this video, we'll be going through 3 of the most common questions that you may be asked when doing an organization restructure. The questions are, firstly, how do I know if my division or team is the right size? What is the right size? Secondly, how many layers should I have in an organization and what are the appropriate spans of control? So how many people should a manager or supervisor manage? And then thirdly, what's the right level of communication and engagement with staff at all levels of the organization as you go through an organization restructure? Question 1. How do you know if your team or your division is the right size? This sort of question often appears when someone says, so how many people should I have in my IT team, for instance? And the answer, as always, in contingency theory of organization structure is, it depends. It depends on, well, what is the nature of your organization? What is the environment in which it's competing? If you're in a very low cost, low margin industry with very little innovation, then you're likely to have a very sort of basic, low cost IT team that do the basics that need to be done. But obviously, if you're in an area or an organization or an environment that's got a lot of innovation, a lot of prototyping of new tools, a lot of prototyping of new services or products, then you're going to need a bigger IT team that can actually support that and enable that sort of prototyping, rollout and scaling of changes as they come through. So how do you know what's the right size? Well, once you've thought enough about the organization and the environment, there's also 3 different ways to come at sizing. Firstly, benchmarking. Benchmarks are a pain in the neck. And the reason they're a pain in the neck is because they're never exactly perfect. But if you can get good benchmarks that are from the same industry you're in, at enough of a granular level that you can actually do comparisons, then they can be useful. So, what you don't want to do is follow them mechanistically. But if you get something that says, look, everyone else in our business has 1 to 4 systems architects and we've got 5, it allows you to then try and think through, well, why do we have 5 when everyone else has 1 to 4? So it's useful for indicating where you may be over or under relative to others, similar firms. The second way to think about it is to try and do it from a work activity analysis. So this is where you actually say, what is the work that this role has to do? How many of these things should you be able to do in a day? And therefore, how many people do we need given our workload? An easy example would be if you're processing mortgages and you know that, on average it takes 15 minutes to process a mortgage, you should be able to work out how many a person can do in a day, and therefore, based on the number of mortgages you have, how many people you need in the mortgage processing team. That said, this becomes a lot more difficult with more complex tasks. So if you try and say to NAS consultants how many insightful and deeply useful analyses they should be able to do in an average time period, it obviously makes no sense because it depends on the complexity of the data, depends on what problem you're solving, depends on what sort of insights you're looking for. So again, it depends. The third way to do it, which is a very aggressive way but is often used by some consulting firms, is just to set a very aggressive target for cost reduction, drive as hard as you can towards that target, and then implement it, see what happens, and then if really necessary, build back up. This again can be done well or badly. When it's done well, you can set a really aggressive target of, say, 40% reduction in costs, work out if we had 40% less funding available, what would we do and what would we not do, and what are the implications for the size of the team, and then implement as much of that as you can and keep a strong watch on how is the process going, how are the deliverables going, and are you still achieving your objectives, and be ready to sort of adjust as needed. I've seen that done both well, but also not well, when people just drive through to the cost savings without thinking through how's that actually going to impact how the organization wins its customers, sells to those customers, and delivers to those customers. And that just means that over time, you've basically cannibalized your own business. Second question then is layers and spans of control. How many layers should there be in an organization, and what's the right span of control? In terms of layers, in general, the fewer layers, the better, but not to the point where you bastardize how your organization works. So work with the philosophy of we want as few layers as possible, but sometimes you have to have them, and sometimes you have more layers in some parts of the organization to others. Don't be stuck to some purist Kantian plan that makes no sense. Equally with spans of control, sometimes people take a very simplistic approach and say, well, you should have 7 reports. That is garbage. The number of reports you have should depend on a number of drivers or contingency factors. The complexity of the work people are doing, how much coordination you need between your people, how much coordination you need between your team and the rest of the organization. Whether people are all in one room or one space, or whether they're nationally or internationally distributed, etc., etc. So rather than just taking a random number and applying it across an organization of humans, think about the nature of the work and apply reasonable estimates. With very simple, consistent work, you might be able to get up as high as 12 or 13 people reporting to a manager. With much more complex work, you might find your teams get down to 4. If it gets below 4, it's probably too small and you should push harder to try and get it up to 4, because you end up with too many small teams in the structure. The third question was, what's the right level of engagement when doing organization structure? I find it useful to think about it in 3 phases. Phase 1 is really at the beginning of the project. It is important to be transparent and tell people what's going on. There should be an announcement by the CEO, by email or on the intranet. There should also be workshops with a wide range of staff to tell them about the project, obtain their input on what's working well and what could be improved in relation to the organization structure, and also get their ideas on what could work better. There should be both anonymous and visible ways for people to submit input. So you're giving people an understanding up front, and you should be clear on, are there job cuts likely to be involved and dollars savings likely to be sought. In the middle, you're engaging with people, both your stakeholder group for the project, but often more broadly, to test emerging ideas. So think carefully about who can give you insights on, would this idea work, would that idea work. At the end of the project, when you've got your design, it's really important to sequence your engagement. From a treating people well point of view, it's very important that those who are going to be negatively impacted by changes should be told, ideally by their manager, what is going to happen and what the impact will be for them before any public announcements are made. When you make public announcements about this is the new org structure, be very clear and have all the details sorted, because people won't really care what each team is doing, what each division is doing. What they care about is, where am I in the new structure? So make sure you know the answers to that before you go live.